Well, let me start, first of all, by thanking you all for coming here. Thanking Zhenya for organizing this symposium, Reed College for hosting it, and the AALAC, whose significance, what the letters mean exactly, I don't remember, but we're very grateful that they provided all the money for this. So, we'll go ahead and start. Since his rise to political prominence in 1999, Vladimir Putin has crafted a public persona whose appeal relies on a clearly constructed, larger-than-life masculinity. The Kremlin has staged a series of media stunts designed to circulate images of Putin, both domestically and abroad, which ooze machismo and authority by emphasizing his athletic prowess, his military might, his subjugation of nature, and his manly physique. If the Kremlin limits its PR campaign to depicting Russia's head of state as the possessor of specifically exceptional powers or qualities, then Putin's fans have taken this step one further. By portraying him as supernatural and even superhuman in comparison to previous leaders of the country, as well as the average Russian man on the streets. In other words, Putin's rise to celebrity over the past decade and a half, as manufactured by both those inside the Kremlin and beyond, has styled his charisma as the upshot of Putin's hyper-masculinity, routinizing it in the by now ubiquitous images I've just shown you. However, our reaction to these images, a mixture of eye-rolling, glee, mockery, disgust, confirms that the cult of Putin's masculinity does not bond its followers to their leader exclusively through the devotion, hero worship, absolute trust, or duty that founding father of sociology Max Weber posits as, quote, decisive for the validity of charisma, end quote. As Emily Johnson and I have argued elsewhere, the cult of Putin is inherently multivalent, generating and accommodating responses from sincere reverence to biting sarcasm, as well as erotic arousal and visceral repulsion. These widely divergent reactions distinguish the cult of Putin's personality from its Soviet precursors, and, as I will argue today, the astonishingly broad range of responses to Putin's manly figure arises from the fact that the virility on display in a Putin meme, or in a Putin action figure, straddles the threshold between Weber's notion of charisma as the single most important quality conferring leadership and theorist Susan Sontag's definition of camp as an aesthetic sensibility. In fact, the Russian president's machismo, more often than not, tips over from charisma through camp and into kitsch. Once we recognize Putin's hypermasculinity as a postmodern mashup of these three, we can see how it functions as the cornerstone of a gender order in post-socialist Russia that paradoxically seeks to naturalize the binary opposition between male and female through extreme artifice and exaggeration. To the best of my knowledge, I'm forging into new territory by linking gender to both Weber's thoughts about charisma and Sontag's notes on camp. Nowhere in his discussion of charisma does Weber address explicitly the difference between men and women as charismatic leaders, and Sontag notoriously claims, quote, that the camp sensibility is disengaged, depoliticized, or at least apolitical, end quote, in her groundbreaking 1964 essay on the topic. Despite Weber's oversight of gender and a claim that Sontag herself later recognized as wrong, the categories of gender, charisma, and camp overlap in contemporary Russian culture due to their reliance on a shared performativity. Thanks to the work of scholars like Judith Butler and Eve Sedgwick, we now accept the axiom that gender is a matter of performance, even if most gender expressions are designed to obscure their performativity so that they naturalize socially constructed behavior. Charisma and camp both entail performances that mobilize binary gender as the means to bond performers to their spectators, thereby creating effective communities with the power to effect social change. Arguably, Weber's analysis of charisma bears a relation to Sontag's jottings on camp analogous to the relationship of masculinity to femininity. And with this analogy in mind, we can productively use Weber's omission of gender as a corrective to Sontag's mistake of apoliticism and vice versa. Needless to say, the charismatic leadership Weber describes can and has been applied to women. However, many of today's prominent female politicians, including Germany's Angela Merkel and our own Hillary Clinton, are often accused of lacking charisma when judged by Weber's initial paradigm, which focuses solely on men. When outlining the contours of charismatic leadership, he returns repeatedly to berserkers, warlords, chieftains, prophets, heroes, and kings, all of whom possess, quote, specific gifts of the body and spirit that have been believed to be supernatural and not accessible to everybody, end quote. Donald Trump's campaign for the Republican nomination in the current American presidential primaries lays bare the link between male potency and political charisma described by Weber over 100 years ago.
I have to say this. He hit my hands. Nobody has ever hit my hands. I've never heard of this word. Look at those hands. Are they small hands? And he referred to my hands. If they're small, something else supposed to be small. I guarantee you there's no problem. I guarantee
you. Okay, if you hadn't heard that yet, now you have. So, much like Trump's comments, what? Sorry, it's done. Much like Trump's comments about his hands, Weber's original writings on charisma have steady recourse to terminology that we readily recognize as thinly veiled code for masculinity. For example, Weber describes charisma as a universally recurring category of domination structure, adding, and here a lengthy quote, charisma knows only inner determination and inner restraint. The holder of charisma seizes the task that is adequate for him and demands obedience and a following by virtue of his mission. His success determines whether he finds them. His charismatic claim breaks down if his mission is not recognized by those to whom he feels he has been sent. If they recognize him, he is their master, so long as he knows how to maintain recognition through proving himself. My goal here is not to accuse Weber of sexism, which would be both facile and wearisome. Instead, I want to point out that despite his pioneering demystification of the mechanism of charisma, Weber recognizes it only in men and behaviors that most cultures tag as masculine, thereby naturalizing the link between charismatic leadership and men. Due to the deep roots of this link in Weber's thought, it lives on in later treatments of charisma. For instance, Gregory Fraden's application of Weber's idea to the career of Ossip Mandelstam in the 1987 monograph A Coat of Many Colors asserts that what distinguishes a charismatic figure, group, or institution from its ordinary counterpart in society is not a particular program, but the difference in intensity of expression between the feebly electrified periphery of a culture and the always steaming, awesome powerhouse of its center. Once we turn to Sontag's notes on camp, we immediately recognize the flip side of Weber's charisma. Although camp, like charisma, arises out of cult, its associations lie not with kings, the ability to command complete involvement and total obedience, or the awesome power of masculinity, but with drag queens. A sense of under-involvement or detachment, and the duplicitous seduction of effeminacy, which Sontag connects to the Epicene style and homosexuality. In contrast to charisma's revolutionary earnestness, quote, the whole point of camp is to dethrone the serious. One can be serious about the frivolous, frivolous about the serious, end quote. If charisma emanates from society's steaming, awesome powerhouse, then camp arises on its feebly electrified periphery, with androgynes in gay bars and in pop culture. However, beyond these gender differences, charisma and camp share at least three features that point to the performativity with which I began this comparison. First, both privilege form or style over content. Much as charisma is not about a particular program, camp emphasizes texture, sensuous surface, and style to such an extent that, according to Sontag, quote, the lens of camp blocks out content, end quote. Second, camp relishes not only the androgynous, but also the exaggeration of sexual characteristics and personality mannerisms. For example, the corny, flamboyant femaleness of Jane Mansfield, Gina Lollobrigida, Jane Russell, Virginia Mayo, the exaggerated he-manness of Steve Reeves, or Victor Mature, which sounds and looks strangely like Weber's specific gifts of the body and spirit not accessible to everybody. In fact, camp and charisma converge in this glorification of character, which, to quote Sontag, is understood as a state of continual incandescence, a person being one very intense thing. Perhaps the only difference between charisma and camp in their treatment of personal intensity is charisma's need to naturalize it, as opposed to camp's revelation of its artificiality and excess. Third and most importantly, charisma and camp both rely on a feedback loop between performer and audience in order to regulate, create, and disseminate their respective affects and effects. Both theorists are rather vague about how the feedback loop functions, but both agree, to quote Weber, that it is recognition on the part of those subject to authority which is decisive for the validity of charisma. Or to quote Sontag, there's a camp vision, a camp way of looking at things, but it's not all in the eye of the beholder. The authority of either the charismatic leader or the camp cognoscenti comes into being only when someone else recognizes it, in a process whose inner workings sound uncannily like a Hegelian master-slave dialectic. However, if charisma conflates this authority with authenticity and masculinity, thereby masking the non-coincidence of all three, then camp grants authority to effectiveness and denaturalized gender by exposing the fissures between them. As a result, charisma frequently functions as a heteronormative policing mechanism, while camp has become a potent instigator of global homonormativity in recent decades. If the relationship between charisma and camp brings to mind a gendered binary, then kitsch represents a third mode of performativity designed to disrupt the feedback loop on which both camp and charisma depend. It too privileges form and style over content. However, kitsch strives not to bond performers to their spectators, but rather to distinguish those who hold the power to label an object or activity kitsch from those who end up unwittingly consuming or creating it. According to Sontag, camp is generous, a kind of love, a tender feeling, and even a mode of enjoyment, of appreciation, not judgment. Whereas kitsch entails an absence of love. As Sedgwick elaborates in her epistemology of the closet, kitsch is a classification that redoubles the aggressive power of the epithet sentimental by, on the one hand, claiming to exempt the speaker of the epithet from the contagion of the kitsch object, and on the other, positing the existence of a true kitsch consumer. Camp, on the other hand, seems to involve a gayer and more spacious angle of view. Unlike kitsch attribution, the sensibility of camp recognition always sees that it is dealing in reader relations and projective fantasy, projective, though not infrequently true, about the spaces and practices of cultural production. Although Sedgwick and Sontag focus their attention on the fine line dividing camp from kitsch, the hostile process they describe, in which calling something kitsch places us outside and above the space of its production, applies equally to charisma. To return to Donald Trump, my conviction that his comb-over Barbie doll wives and not-so-veiled allusions to his penis are all instances of kitsch allows me to look down my nose not only at Trump, but also at the thousands of people who find him charismatic. Yet, just like charisma and camp, kitsch does not go beyond the sensuous surface of whatever it judges, for example, by critiquing Trump's political platform, such as it is. In short, whether a person, text, artifact, or image is perceived as an instance of kitsch, camp, or charisma depends just as much on the perception of the viewer and the nature of the feedback loop as it does on the actual person or thing in question. Whether we view Vladimir Putin as the Russian Federation's charismatic president, a campy, larger-than-life he-man, or the pistol-packing vigilante of contemporary Russian kitsch depends on our individual sensibilities, as well as the means by which a given instance of Putiniana makes its way to us. Even those of us for whom Putin memes on the internet long ago crossed over from camp into kitsch might conceivably find the man charismatic if we met him in person, as Professor Treisman apparently has. And I'm curious to know how charismatic he was then. However, few of us are ever going to experience Putin as a steaming, awesome powerhouse, because we stand on the periphery of contemporary Russian culture, and studied increasingly through the feeble electrification of the internet. Despite greater proximity, the vast majority of Russians occupy a position not unlike our own, since the Putin they perceive is mediated either by Russia's sycophantic state-sponsored television and journalism, or the more variegated world of the web. The inherent virtuality of the Putin seen by all, with the exception of a tight-knit circle of political insiders, friends, and family, allows any given image of the Russian leader to slide almost effortlessly between charisma, through camp, and into kitsch. Since the feedback loops of television, print journalism, and the internet allow very little actual feedback. The constant shifting between these three, which I've decided to call camp charisma, is not exclusive to representations of Putin, and I would argue that it characterizes popular depictions of gendered behavior in contemporary Russia more widely. Because Putin has effectively cornered the market on the masculine variant of camp charisma, I'd like to prove my point by showing you several instances of the feminine version, which together illustrate the mixed political potential of hypergender in Russia today. My first example comes courtesy of Olya Polyakova, the self-styled super blonde of all Russia, super blondinka всей Руси, who provides a hilarious send-up of Russian stereotypes in her 2012 music video, Russian Style. The title of Polyakova's song refers to the Korean mega-hit Gangnam Style, as do several musical and visual memes in Russian style. Within this global pop idiom, Polyakova, who almost always sports a kokoshnik, as you can see here, camps up the cliches of Russia and Russian femininity in which global culture typically trades. And here I'll show you a brief clip from the video. Soviet army uniforms, the ludicrously long flaxen braids and equally long legs, Polyakova's striptease appearance out of a barrel of caviar before a group of hunky balalaika players, all this comes together in a stunning spectacle of camp charisma, demonstrating Russia's currency in the global pop market. The song's lyrics, insofar as they say anything, describe the Russian super blonde, unlike her camp currency, as the sort of girl who refuses to sell herself to the highest bidder. And the video's brief framing narrative locates the clip I just showed you in a Siberian log cabin, which houses the sole survivors of the apocalypse and in which one can take refuge only if wearing a kokoshnik. Looking like a Slavic James Mansfield or Virginia male, Polyakova provides not only a vivid illustration of the widespread hyperfemininity in Russian popular culture, but also a performance beneath whose silly surface lurks Putin-era neo-nationalism. If Russian style playfully realizes the political promise of camp charisma, then my second example does the opposite by showing its potential to gut ostensibly political acts of any real substance. Here I have in mind Putin's army, a group of nubile college co-eds whose 2011 internet campaign challenged viewers to show just how far they're willing to go in support of Putin.
Привет, меня зовут Диана, я студентка. Я безумная человека, изменившего жизнь нашей страны. Он достоин политики. И шикарный мужчина, он владеет
images and voiceover in the video demonstrate the passion these women show for Putin has nothing to do with his politics, but rather with his status as a shikarny mushina, which is apparently what makes him a dostoyny politik. Slightly later in 2011, Putin's army once again bared their support for Putin by washing Russian-made cars before a flock of eager journalists.
Moving on, a group of young Russian women known as Putin's army who said they'll do anything for their beloved Prime Minister have again shown their devotion. Taking Putin's love of Russian cars, they decided to clean as many of them as they could stop up on Sparrow Hills, and plenty of drivers were more than happy to pull over for a soaping from these scantily clad ladies. In Russian make of car was eligible to be washed by the girls who, despite wearing very little, still managed to wear some high heels. It seems to be an effort to please the Prime Minister by cleaning Russian cars, they didn't mind getting a little bit dirty themselves. And I feel slightly guilty saying all that myself.
Okay. As Valerie Sperling persuasively argues, the willingness of Putin's army to rip their clothing and to don stilettos, bikini tops, and Daisy Dukes for their leader falls into a larger pattern in contemporary Russian politics, which mobilizes gender and sexuality either to enhance, as in the case of Putin, or to undermine politicians' perceived machismo. When we view Putin's army as an instance of Cambrisma, we see that the young women's content-free enthusiasm for their country's leader in effect models the feedback loop connecting Putin to his followers by placing all of us in the position of busty but brainless Putin cheerleaders. In case we think that ditching political substance in favor of hyper-feminine style is confined to the young and the senseless, let us consider a beauty pageant held in 2014 for female soldiers from among the pro-Russian rebels in the Donetsk People's Republic. In celebration of International Women's Day, contestants paraded in a combination of battle fatigues and evening gowns to express what one participant described as her rejection of women's emancipation in favor of the supposedly Slavic traditions of cooking, bearing children, and caring for men. Rather than choose a single winner, judges awarded prizes to all contestants, declaring them collectively flowers of the Republic. Given that these women were waging a separatist war, their appearance in a beauty contest seems grotesque, since it shifts attention from the life and death political conflict in eastern Ukraine onto a feminine myth that war does not merely undermine, but typically destroys. The Donetsk beauty pageant, like similar contests held in Russian women's prisons, demonstrates how feminine charisma transforms the heat of actual battle into tepid eroticism, as well as how subservient Slavic women exist to uphold leaders whose claim to power rests first and foremost on machismo. If the beauty pageant in Donetsk implies that women's agency ultimately hinges on men, then the recent popularity of so-called shkoly sтерви, or bitch schools, in Russia's major cities makes this dependency painfully clear. Inspired by Yevgenia Shatskaya's series of best-selling books, which bear the titles like The Bitch's Bible, The Bitch's Desktop Book, The Bitch in Bed, and this one, Bitchology, Stervologia, these courses promise to transform any woman from a miserable and loveless plain Jane into a sexy, sly, strong woman who can influence men and manipulate them in order to get what she wants, as we'll see in a glimpse of the first day of a Bitch Academy lesson right here.
Опять же, часто спрашивают, чем ты занимаешься? Ну, нам кажется, что мы стараемся женщин научить быть такими и так влиять на мужчин, что мужчины не остались. Оказалось, что обычная женщина, как правило, сама пытается решать свои проблемы, а необычная женщина решает свои проблемы при помощи мужчин. Или одного, или двух, или многих. Но вот часто таких женщин в те времена называли стервой. Почему? Ну, фиг знает почему. Может, потому что другие женщины завидовали, может, потому что мужчины считали, что, в общем, это неправильно, и как-то не должна женщина быть там сильной, умной, хитрой. Мы же видим. Мужчина обычно считает, что вот он там самый главный. И терпеть не могут, когда им управляют. Но вот эти женщины, такие необычные особенные, они как-то умеют управлять мужчиной. В принципе, каждая женщина умеет управлять мужчиной, только это наука о женском коварстве, которая вроде как для мужчин должна быть незаметна. Ну, в принципе, мы этим занимаемся. Это не наука о женском коварстве.
Okay. So for those women in a class like this who successfully learn to overcome their fear of men, to dress in the right way, to beg for money when they need it, and to seduce a man without him noticing it, the $200 fee for 2 days of classes, in this case taught by a man, pays off in the form of sexual fulfillment, material security, and for a lucky few, marriage to an oligarch. However, the Bitch Academy's final lesson reveals that no amount of makeup, lacy underwear, or bedroom stunts will ever truly fool a man.
Ну вот решайте. Либо развиваете себя и опять становитесь. Либо какую-нибудь свою девушку. Интересный, классный, надежный девушка. Очень часто женщин. Или извините, мужчины, ну как-то они, наверное, не дураки. И самая большая хитрость. Мужчины все понимают. Абсолютно все. А тётки на всем догадываются. Поэтому все, что вы им применяете, они знают наизусть. Обмануть мужчину невозможно.
Okay, not only do the sex-pot wiles taught at the Bitch Academy transform students into shining examples of feminine charisma, but they also retool students' psyches to bolster the flagging masculinity of Russian men, whose own desire ultimately determines that of women. For my fifth and final example, I'd like to turn to the realm of political protest and consider Femin, the originally Ukrainian feminists whose topless protests have, against such patriarchal institutions as bitch schools have caught the media's eye since 2009. Femin's tactics of sextremism have allowed the group to avoid the invisibility, which has been the fate of many feminists in the former Soviet Union during the Putin era, as well as the 2-year prison terms to which members of Pussy Riot were sentenced in 2012. Unlike Pussy Riot, whose protest strategy utterly rejects hyperfemininity in favor of an angry punk aesthetic, Femin has chosen to denounce Putin's charisma by adopting its terms and replicating them in its demonstrations. Femin typically throws a very different combination of martial aggression and feminine glamour than that in evidence at the Donetsk beauty pageant back in Putin's face, as footage of one of their actions from April 2013 shows. In what you just saw, 5 of Femin's members stormed a photo op between Angela Merkel and Putin at a technology show in Hanover, Germany. Their bared chests provide a weird echo of Putin's Siberian vacation antics, and they reinforce the slogans painted on their bodies, including Putin, idi nahui, by screaming fuck Putin at the top of their lungs. By occupying the gray area between third-wave feminism, post-feminism, and performance art, Femin pushes the hypergender we saw in Olya Polyakova, Putin's army, the Donetsk beauty pageant, and bitchology over the edge of camp and into kitsch, thereby exposing the biopolitical stakes of Putin-era charisma. If Putin's leadership depends on his status as a macho he-man, then the ideal Russian citizen is in fact a woman whose hyperfemininity naturalizes neo-traditional, neo-national neoliberalism, making any woman who refuses this duty both a pariah and a political threat. Sadly, the ongoing protests of Femin have yet to yield more than righteous indignation or cynical laughter within either Ukraine or the Russian Federation. As Femin has discovered, the regime of hypergender in Russia today is effectively insulated against criticism by the very combination of charisma, camp, and kitsch that comprises it. Such criticism would require going beyond form and style and penetrating the sensuous surface of a figure like Putin to understand the intertwined psychological and social ramifications of charisma. This is precisely what performance artist Vladislav Mamyshev-Monroe did when he began impersonating Putin in the mid-2000s. Best known as Russia's very first drag queen, Mamyshev-Monroe embodied an astonishing range of cultural icons throughout his career, including Marilyn Monroe most famously, but also Alla Pugacheva, Lyubov Orlova, Fyodor Dostoevsky, Viktor Tsoi, Hitler, and the Pope. However, Mamyshev-Monroe's artistic practice, which used impersonation as the means to penetrate another's soul, led the artist to a startling discovery in the case of Putin. As Mamyshev-Monroe described in a 2013 interview, quote, "When I first dressed up as Putin, I had the impression that I had become some sort of colossal totemic maggot that was about to burst from all the shit it had swallowed," end quote. Russia's current gender order masks Putin's maggot machismo beneath Italian sweatsuits worth more than $3,000 and suspected Botox treatments, shielding the country's citizens from the shit through modes of performativity that preclude substantive critique and discourage protest. The victory of this gender regime in Russia today appears doubly alarming, since it places virtually all expressions of masculinity and femininity, as well as sexuality, in the sphere of the political. Need I remind us that Russia enacted national-level homophobic legislation in 2013, banned transsexuals and transvestites from driving in 2014, and forbade the sale of women's lace panties for supposed safety reasons in 2015. Western media tend to treat such information as a freak show, underestimating the pervasiveness and the mobility of the performativity that arises when charisma, camp, and kitsch fuse. As Mamyshev-Monroe, Femin, Pussy Riot, Russia's LGBTQ activists, and many others have discovered, Putin-era camperisma is extremely difficult to combat because it not only dictates the terms of political engagement in Russia today, but also creates tantalizing microzones of play that make distasteful limitations placed on identity formation more palatable without affecting any real change. By shifting politics from the realm of ideas and actions to that of surface and style, Putin-era camperisma has successfully routinized the very opposite of what Weber and Sontag envisioned for both charisma and camp. Rather than challenging patriarchal power, as Weber outlines, or allowing for the integration of gays into society, as Sontag posited, contemporary Russian camperisma naturalizes Putin's very unnatural hegemony with the same gesture that lays bare its character as kitsch. Thank you.
Hi, folks. I think I'm going to be playing Vladimir Mamyshev-Monroe, impersonating an expert that I'm not, following Jenny's remarks yesterday that a lot of us are not experts on today's culture, and I'm, like Jenny said, more of an expert on cultural production in the context of literary production, particularly in the context of 19th century print capitalism, which gives me some tools to look at what's happening in cultural production today, but those tools go only so far. What I have to go on in describing what I'll call the field of elite Russian millennials who want to be, as Yuri Sablikin said, молодые образованные европейцы, the young, educated Europeans. So I'll be describing the field developing since about 1999-2000 of people who are today under 40, hence born at about 1980 or later. As I'm going to be describing that field, I'm going to be relying on information that's actually widely available on the internet, and also on a good deal of personal conversations with people who are somehow involved in that field. And I'm thankfully not related to the center of it. My entry into into it is by way of Petersburg and not by way of Moscow. And that field is concentrated geographically in Moscow, really. My information, and it sort of goes to the methodology I'm working with, is following widely available information on the internet and personal stories of people who are sometimes at the center of the field, but mostly on the margins. That sort of evidentiary basis immediately raises the question as to what constitutes evidence and what constitutes facts, as well as the epistemological question as to how we can know what is going on and what constitutes those facts. My point, I think, methodologically, is not to claim veracity to facts in the many stories I'll be trying to tell. My point is to follow certain patterns that repeat. So I'll be happy to discuss any particular biography of the actors in this field or any particular institution. But at the end of the day, I'm aiming to map that field, sketch its history, and also identify repeated patterns, repeated narratives in that field. We might end up talking to, and I did a little bit of research yesterday about the scandal that Marina mentioned in yesterday's talk, the scandal with the question about the siege of Petersburg on the Dorsht television channel. So we might talk about that and raise the question of who the actors are, what they're doing, what the facts are, what the consequences of that is. But I'll leave that to the end of my talk and say in a couple more words in a preliminary fashion. I'll be going over the narratives sort of in a circular fashion. So and there's far too much information that I have to share. So if you tune out at some point, chances are when you tune back in, I'll still be mapping the same pattern, but in relation to a different figure in that field or a different institution. So tune out and in at will. Now, if I have an argument in what I'm going to be saying, I think it is that it goes counter to the title of the symposium. I don't want to see the Russian case in my material as unique to Russia and unique to Putinism. I want to see it as representative of the changes generally in the cultural economy in the Western world. And I want to see the Russian case as pretty much the same as, in my Russian stories, as very similar to the stories of our students or our recent students who are going into today's culture industry in America. A couple of my students actually have gone into the culture industry in Russia and are now back in that culture industry in America. So I want to see what happens in Russia as not as distinct or unique, but rather as highly similar and perhaps representative of what happens with millennials, with elite millennials in America. Now, in that sense, the important reference points to me are culturally industrial rather than political. So Putinism for me is a Putinism with a small, not with a capital P. We want to be very attentive to what in particular happens politically in Russia, but not overestimate the role of politics or the role of the regime in understanding what's going on in the field of cultural production. So, of course, I have a personal stake in this game, and that it's more convenient for me to teach this material in my classes if I tell my students, American students, that by looking at Russian material, they actually are learning about themselves. That the Russian stories and that they can discover can be especially representative of our students' American lives. And the reason for that representative role of Russian culture is that the field of cultural production in Russia is much more narrow, it's easier to see, the narratives are more apparent. The field of cultural production in the US is much broader and it's more confusing. And the Russian field of cultural production is more immediately apparent. We can see what's happening in the US by looking at what narratives are important in Russia. Okay, well, the last point I want to make in terms of preliminary remarks goes to how rewarding this material might be for us to teach in the classroom in the way of bringing up important theoretical tools. And for me, the list is, as it will be apparent, the list is will include the Frankfurt School, Raymond Williams in British Cultural Studies, the sociology of Pierre Bourdieu, Foucault's theories of discourse, the work of Deleuze and Guattari, neo-Marxism along the lines of Michael Hart and Antonio Negri, and a variety of recent media theories addressing the logic of how information operates and how agents operate in the field of information. So in teaching this material, we can really bring up a range of theories, not to use as truth, but to use as tools for understanding what's going on in the world we live in really today. Okay, let me start mapping the field by saying that the key thing in identifying who belongs to that field is not only the age that I mentioned, but more primarily the relation to information or the relation to the media. There are transitional figures, and that's quite interesting, I'll be mentioning them. But for me at 45, the formative relation to information goes by way of print in the book. And for the millennials, the formative relation of information is no longer by way of print in the book, and no longer by way of rereading canonical texts, but rather by way of the computer screen and relating to the world, not by way of print, but in an audio-visual kind of way. So there is a radically different relation to information between Generation Xers and the millennials about whom I'll be talking today. Now, I mentioned Yuri Saplikin himself. Yuri Saplikin is the editor of, was the editor of the Afisha magazine, and is an important voice for the millennials, though he's a Gen Xer. He's, in fact, a print person. So his definition are very important. Young, educated Europeans are the actors in my field. They're under 40. They are likely to use Facebook rather than Kontakte. They are likely to be socialized by way of leading schools and universities, mostly in Moscow. They are very importantly English-speaking and are highly interested in Western cultural production that they have access to in English. What are the numbers? As far as the figures in various editorial positions in various online and print publications, I think the numbers are only in the dozens. The people contributing reporting or journalism to those institutions are probably in the hundreds, and the audiences maybe are in the tens of thousands or in the hundreds of thousands. At one point, the site Большой город, the big city, the website will be important to me. At a point in 2012, 2013, the number of unique visitors to that site was about 30,000 people only. Now, for the sake of comparison, if you go to leading Russian video bloggers on YouTube, you'll find someone like Katie Clapp with 7 million followers. So the group I'm describing is actually fairly narrow and fairly elite. Now, as I mentioned, Afisha, Time Out type of magazine, was a crucial institution for organizing the field I'm describing. It was started in 1999 by Ilya Tsintsev. And gradually, as it formed the center, a number of similar types of publications started appearing. Afisha was initially a print weekly magazine, but quickly went online within months. And just a few months ago, it finally closed its print version and is staying only online. Now, in 2002, it spawned the Большой город, the big city, magazine that was slightly more artsy than the Afisha itself. Later on into that field came, came curiously, GQ and Esquire, male-style magazines that were offering cultural information and not along the lines of Vanity Fair in America. It's curious that it's GQ and Esquire and not, for instance, Vogue that had existed since the late 90s. But if we get the chance to talk about gender, it's an interesting kind of question that male magazines entered that field and entered the conversation in that cultural field. Now, the other publications that gravitate toward that field, but aren't necessarily within it, are Interview, the Russian version of the Interview magazine with the editor Alena Dalevskaya. In 2008, Prokhorov's Snob kind of entered that field, but not, but it technically belongs outside it. Of course, Kolta is somewhat part of that field, but is also outside it for reasons we can detail a little later. There is some of the television channels are also on the margins of the field I'm describing, that many of the actors in that field go through Snob, go through some of the television channels, go through Kolta. Two characters I have in mind, two actors I have in mind are Roman Super and Alexander Uzhanov, who Roman Super worked on REN TV as a correspondent, and Alexander Uzhanov worked on NTV as an editorial figure in one of the television programs. So the actors in my field go through even the regular television channels, but stay there for a fairly short time. The radio Echo Moskvy, actually crucially involved in the siege scandal on Dozht, is also is also on the margins of that field. And various traditional newsprint media like Forbes, Vedomosti newspaper, Kommersant newspaper, RBK, Russian Business Consulting, a news and aggregator service, are institutions that are to the margins of that field. And also regular news aggregators like Lenta.ru. Okay, so that's the range of institutions with lifestyle magazines like Afisha, like Большой город, and today the Look at Me conglomerate are at the center of that field. And the actors in that field view those publications as centrally important to their life, but they can actually trace their careers or go for information on those to those institutions that I've been mentioning at the end of that list. Now, okay, let me offer a first biography of a representative actor in that field, and this will be a transitional figure. In that the person is Philippe Bakhtin, was born in Vologda in '76, graduated in '97 from the Pskov Pedagogical Institute, then moved to Moscow, and between '99 and 2001 studied at VGIK, the main Russian film school. That provided him a point of socialization into the field I'm describing. And he proceeded to, between 2002 and 2005, work as vice editor-in-chief of Afisha, of the Afisha magazine. Between 2003 and 2005, he was editor-in-chief of For Him magazine, note the link to the men's magazines. Between 2005 and 2011, he was editor-in-chief of Esquire. In 2011, he resigned and proceeded to work on organizing camps for the summer camps for the children under the overall title Strana Детей, the Land of Children, which the project was hugely popular and successful until last year a huge scandal erupted as to the logic of funding of those initiatives and the logic, in fact, of Philippe Bakhtin's participation in it. Since as the camp, the Land of Children, that project was closed in 2015, at least Philippe Bakhtin left it, he came back to Afisha in an editorial capacity. And by the end of 2015, like I mentioned earlier, the print version of Afisha closed and all the staff were fired. Philippe Bakhtin, however, stayed as editor at Afisha in its website, in its internet branch. And this gets us to today with Philippe Bakhtin's biography. What is important in that biography to me is to note the crucial role of educational institutions in the Moscow educated institutions. Note that Philippe Bakhtin is a provincial kid, but came to Moscow to the main film school, and that institution provided him the mechanism of socializing into the elites of that elite field. And then he tracked a particular biography. A surprisingly high number of important actors in that field are in fact not from Moscow, but the crucial role in the development of that field and its organization are key academic institutions in Moscow, such as the journalism department at the University of Moscow, RGGU, the Russian University for the Humanities, recently the Higher School of Economics, the Institute of International Relations. Those are the key schools. If you look at successful actors in that field, almost always they've gone through one of those schools in Moscow that provided them with mechanisms for socialization into that field. Very often they didn't graduate because those educational institutions are there not to provide the skills, they're there to provide a mechanism for socialization. Another important point about Bakhtin's biography is that he studied at film school, and the entry into that field is very often based, like I mentioned, not on the relation to print, but on the relation to other media. And the medium of film is important in that instance. Other key figures in that field go by way of music criticism, and among them Maxim Semelyar, born in '75, early on in the 2000s, the Afisha critic for music. Another figure along those lines, and he falls squarely into the millennial paradigm, is Alexander Podbachev, born in '84 in the provincial town of Obninsk. Also a music critic for Afisha, who became its editor-in-chief between 2013 and 2014. Roman Volobuyev, as the most important film critic in Russia, also film critic for Afisha, is another figure in that list of key actors who are not print related, but have a millennial relation to the media. Okay, with the preview of represented biography, I now want to switch to what the financial bases of that field are. If I understand it correctly, Afisha was initially envisioned as a reasonably commercial project and funded by venture capital. Now, a radical shift occurs between about 2005 and 2008, when what I'll call the new Russian oligarchs, the Putin Russian oligarchs, come into that field and begin either taking over these institutions like Afisha or creating their own. And in 2005, Alexander Mamut takes over Afisha and Большой город and begins to run the magazine. Of course, Alexander Prokhorov in 2008 creates the Snob magazine and begins to run that. In 2009, Alexander Vinokurov comes to organize the media holding that includes the Dozhd, the Rain television channel, also the Slon news aggregator, and buys in 2010 the Big City publication from Afisha and brings it into its media holding. Now, Alexander Vinokurov, incidentally, in 2011, the member of the what was the oppositional committee I have in mind that involves Navalny and gets elected as part of the protest 2011-2012.
Организационный комитет?
Yeah. So Alexander Vinokurov becomes a member of that in 2011, but when you look into how he is funding the Rain television channel and the other aspects of that enterprise, one looks very simply to the crisis of 2008 and finds obviously on Wikipedia that Alexander Vinokurov was one of the managers and owners of the Kit Finance investing group, a bank that failed in 2008 and was rescued by the government. But of course, Alexander Vinokurov ends up having in publicly available numbers $250 million as a result of his bank failing. And it's apparently with that money that Vinokurov initially begins to fund those independent institutions in the field I'm describing. The point of that story is that by 2008 or 9, most of the institutions in that field come to be funded by the quote-unquote oligarchs, and it becomes irrelevant whether they're successful financially. What becomes relevant is the symbolic capital that those obligations can generate. Accordingly, what's happening as the oligarchs move in to fund this field, the salaries of these actors become remarkably high. So a salary, for instance, of the editors of Большой город, the Big City, in 2012-2013, just before it got closed, was in the order of $10,000 a month for a 25-year-old person who is editing the website with 30,000 contributors. So if one thinks what the salaries were as late as 2012-2013 in that field, they're remarkably high. And my sense is that they're a result of the arms race that has happened once the oligarchs came to fund those publications and were directing money to the actors I'm describing. Now, a crucial event happens in 2006 in that field, and that is the appearance of the website, Look at Me, created by Vasily Osmanov and a number of his friends in Moscow. Vasily Osmanov is from Petersburg, but studied at the University for International Relations in Moscow. And Look at Me was just a street blog inviting anyone to send in pictures that they find curious on the city streets. And it became randomly far more successful than alternative websites. So much so that by 2008, as the economic crisis started reshifting the finances in the media, the Look at Me site was able to become a regular internet publication, attracting employees from the other media. By 2012, Look at Me became hugely successful and started winning over Afisha that had been dominating that field. Look at Me spawned a number of what Look at Me does by about 2010 is it provides the kind of information that Afisha does as its central site called The Village, Look at Me. It also spawns a men's magazine to compete with the Esquires and GQs called Fur. Soon after, it spawns a Hopes and Fears website for young, educated people interested in entrepreneurship. And finally, it spawns a Wonder Zine magazine for women. That was the last publication, but the last site they produced in that range. What's crucial about Look at Me and what is now known as the Look at Media publishing conglomerate is that it hadn't been supported by significant financial capital. And so it was always run on a commercial basis. So for instance, the salary for the editor of The Village Look at Me for its Petersburg branch is only 30,000 rubles. Basically, if the salaries of similar actors at Afisha are on the order of $10,000 in about 2011, 2012, the salary of a Look at Me equally ranked editor is in today's money about $500 a month. So Look at Me, perhaps for financial reasons, or for reasons of how it was organized on a financial basis, rather than for the sake of symbolic capital, was able to win in that field, and had come to dominate it by about 2014, 2015. Now, a couple more words about what happens as we come to a crisis in journalism and the new media that occurs a little bit out of step in my book from the political and economic crises that we know about. It occurs in about 2013, 2014, when it becomes clear that I'm gonna avoid describing the logic of what becomes clear, but basically the field is dispersed, and Afisha, like I mentioned, closes its print version. Look at Me closes the site Hopes and Fears for young entrepreneurs. It ceases to pay its contributors. There are major problems in that field that are mostly, in my book, economic at the core. But there's a lag between when the economic crisis actually begins in Russia and when the media field I'm describing starts restructuring. But the final moments of that career, of my story, is the dispersal of that field for economic reasons and what happens to the actors who were central to that field and who were at times hugely financially successful. And here are some of the narratives that I see happening in their lives. So some of them, like Philippe Bakhtin, stay at the top of the management of that field that's dwindling, but they remain at the top. Others pursue careers in television and the cinema, and we can talk about Mikhail Idov here, Roman Volobuev, Andrei Rivkin, and some others. Not very few of them are successful in pursuing alternative careers. Some of them join commercial projects, and the important project these days is Ilya Tsitsipir's latest venture, which is this DLNS service that allows you to furnish your apartment and refurbish your apartment, thanks to the designers that service will provide. So some of my actors go into various commercial projects in the new economy. The most important switch, I think, that's happening now is the switch to the Enlightenment and philanthropic website. The philanthropic websites that I have in mind is centrally Taki Dela, and the Enlightenment projects are Arzamas and two open universities. These are kind of TED Talk types of sites that provide popular scientific information. Open University is funded by Khodorkovsky, and Arzamas is funded by oligarchic money as well. And the actors in the news media I was describing, as the news media are being dispersed and are dwindling, are switching to those new Enlightenment and philanthropy type of websites supported by oligarchic money in today's political context. Now, many of those actors in my field move out of the country and start working for publications like Radio Svoboda or for Ukrainian television channels and flee that way. I think, another important narrative that we can talk about is what the creator of the Look at Media conglomerate is doing now. He was trying to produce a Hopes and Fears magazine in New York, a street-level Time Out type of magazine for the American audience, which closed 3 months ago and utterly failed. So there are attempts by those actors I'm describing to create similar types of media organizations in the West, and they are generally failing. I think the most telling narratives of the millennials come to me from Petersburg, actually. As journalism and media fail to support my actors' lives, is that they switch to do other things. One of them drives a taxi, another works as a carpenter, another one works as a cashier in a store. My favorite story probably comes, this is what I'm going to conclude on, comes from a person whose name I'm not going to give you, but the story is this. As a woman of 18 in about 2012, she moves to Moscow, goes to the Russian Humanities University in Moscow to do foreign languages, socializes into that field. Her friends there encourage her to drop education and start working at the Wonderzine magazine, which she does. But then Wonderzine is unable to support her living in Moscow. She goes back to Kharkiv, where she is originally from. The last I saw of her, she was in Petersburg last summer. She was really excited that she was able to use her excellent English skills for a productive purpose in her her life, and that was she came to Petersburg to go to a training camp for telephone operators in English for the West. That's the career of an active actor in my field, in the field of cultural production I'm describing today. So those are the trajectories that, and I think that the last one is perhaps the most representative to me. I have things to say about ideology and politics. Very briefly, and about gender. To me, the actors in that field are not politically clear, not politically engaged, and ideologically they are also highly flexible. So about 2008, libertarianism was very important, and a lot of them are libertarians. By today, in the context of today's crisis, a lot of them are socialists and believe in philanthropy. A hugely important issue these days is feminism, that comes out of a scandal about a year ago that we can talk in some detail about. But the recent developments with the rise of feminism among those people, among the actors in that field is very interesting. But in principle, I think their ideology is very flexible, as is their politics. The final note on gender, to me, the Gen X generation has a lot of hugely successful women. And we can go through a list of successful women who come through the 90s field of cultural production. In the 2000s, the number of successful women is extremely small. To me, there is a remarkable shift of how women's careers ceased being successful in recent years. With that, I'll finish. Thank you.